Morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Clifford Stone. I was a Sergeant First Class, United States Army. I had a secret clearance with nuclear assurity. I could get the clearance that I needed to do whatever it was that was necessary for me to do at the time on special operations when I was called in on those. What I'm referring to here is that I was involved in situations where we actually did recoveries of crashed saucers, for lack of a better term, debris thereof. There were bodies that were involved with some of these crashes, also some were alive. While we were doing all this, we were telling the American public there was nothing to it. We were telling the world there was nothing to it. I'd like to go into detail on some of the cases about the nuts and bolts cases right here, but I will be available if you have any questions concerning my involvement in this. You can talk to Dr. Greer to arrange for me to get to talk to you. But the whole situation is, we've set back, we've told the American people that there's no such thing as UFOs. I've been involved where we have recovered these objects. We know them to be of extraterrestrials. In 1969, I had an event that happened to me while I was stationed at Fort Lee, Virginia. We went to Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. That would be my first exposure to any time that we would be recovering an unidentified flying object. When we went there, we already had people that was already in the facility. We were a backup team, which was supposed to be NBC because there was supposed to be some nuclear materials that was on board this craft. Later on, most people involved were to be told that there was nothing on board it. It was nothing more than just a crash of one of our aircraft. I know better because I was one of the people that approached it with a Geiger counter to get surface readings. I was the first person to go ahead and see that there were bodies on it. That would be the first of approximately 12 events. UFO crashes are not events that take place every day. They're rare. I know we're not alone in the universe. I know that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It's evidence that has been denied to the American people. I stand before you today in my almighty God, and I tell you this. If Congress calls me in and says, will you testify in detail what you know, I stand here today prepared and ready to do just that. Governments must never lie to the people for no reason. Thank you.
Our visit to Laughlin in the United States, we had the good fortune to meet up with Clifford Stone, a man who claims personal knowledge of how an elite unit of US Special Forces were for many years engaged in the actual recovery of extraterrestrial craft and their occupants.
Clifford, two specific areas associated with Project Moondust. One, as I understand it, the recovery of debris that you would expect to find coming in from outer orbits and such like, decaying satellites and the like. But also another side to Project Moondust as well. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Certainly. Project Moondust, by definition, is the overall field exploitation program of only two things. Objects of non-U.S. origin, which would involve Soviet satellites, and of course we would want those for technical analysis to determine the capabilities of those satellites for intelligence purposes, and the other being objects of unknown origin. The objects of unknown origin is our interest of, our concern or our interest of that particular program. Now, in order to accomplish the recovery of these objects, the United States Air Force had in place what was called Operation Blue Fly Teams. These consisted of a three-man team that was prepared to go anywhere in the world to recover these said items. On more than one occasion, we have recovered objects of non-U.S. origin that was also of unknown origin. In short, the best that once they did the field exploitation, the best they could do is come a round circle, what we call round robin, to tell us what the objects were not, leaving us to only speculate what the objects were. In more than one instance, these objects were referred to as objects of non-earthly origin. In the intelligence community, you're very careful about saying interplanetary. It's a word you don't want to use. In the intelligence community, you're very careful about using the term UFO or unidentified flying object. Unconventional aircraft or unknown aircraft. Case in point, the unit involved with these programs was formerly the 4602nd Air Intelligence Service Squadron out of Fort Belvoir, Virginia, an Army post, but it was an Air Force unit that was doing this. A highly elite, the best the Air Force had to offer within the community. What most people are not aware of is that from the conception of that unit, just several months later, after it was conceptualized and formally activated, it took over the full investigation of UFOs.
Have we got a year for this, roughly?
Yes, sir. 1953, January the 21st, I believe it was, 1953. The 4602nd came into existence. By March, April of 1953, in accordance with Change 1 to Air Force Regulation 200-52, or 200-2, it was given the operational control of the investigations. Prior to that, contrary to popular belief, Blue Book still did not have a handle on the investigations. OSI had a handle on the investigations. In conjunction with you folks during the Second World War, the British, MI6 created what was called Operation Crossbow, Dead Reckoning. What were the Germans working on that they were about to launch against cities in England? CIC was charged with the responsibility of recovering debris of so-called Foo Fighters in 1943. So, long before Kenneth Arnold saw his sighting in the state of Washington, near Mount Rainier, we were already underway investigating UFOs. Scandinavia, 1946.
Sure.
So,
now, where is all this taking us now? Presumably, you're absolutely convinced that you have the information which, without any shadow of a doubt, points to what some people would call a cover-up. But this is a modern term now. We're talking about a cover-up of documentation in the 90s, specifically referring to events albeit decades ago. How significant is that if you're going to try and convince congressional hearings and the like to take on board this whole thing? How significant are these findings?
Well, the findings are quite significant because the paperwork, I could tell you some fascinating stories of while I was in the military, but it would just be another fascinating story. People have had their lives destroyed, and we sit back, feel sorry for them because they don't have it all together. Yet these were real events, and I know they were real events. So this is never going to go ahead and break down the walls of Jericho, if you wish. But the documentation provides that there is something going on.
Wendelle Stevens was a lieutenant colonel in technical intelligence in the U.S. Air Force and is now a UFO investigator.
Now having an extraterrestrial vehicle and some bodies in their hands, didn't know when the next one would come down, where they came from, what they were going to do about it. There were a lot of unanswered questions. And the United States was in a turmoil at the time administratively because we were shifting from a war economy and a military-industrial command structure to a civilian structure. So the military was still dominant, and they wanted to keep control of this until they knew what was happening. So they created, and remember, General Marshall was our Secretary of State at the time. He was a five-star general. These people selected certain representatives from the military-industrial complex that they controlled, generals and admirals and certain scientists that worked with the military and worked with industrial planning. These men were designated as a task force to take charge of any event that followed. And one did. Almost a year later, on the 25th of March of 1978, the next one came down, 1948, the next one did crash, and it came down under observation by radar, so that we knew where it landed at the time that it struck the ground, and a helicopter was over it in less than an hour. It reported what it observed, and the plan generated by these people from the military-industrial complex after the Roswell crash was immediately put into place. All of the generals and admirals and advisors and scientists were contacted and ordered to proceed to a base in Colorado, where they were picked up and driven to the crash site. Now, all of these men have gone to the scene to see for themselves what an alien vehicle looks like, and they were going to advise General Marshall directly, who was controlling everything from remote position from telephones, on how to proceed. And when an operation is that big, you can't cover everything up. We discovered that the owner of the property where the vehicle came down was arrested in his house with his family, and they were kept in the house for 4 days, not allowed to go outside or anything. All the roads in the area were blocked. All access was closed. People that lived close enough to know something about it were kept in their houses. Now, if it never happened, then this evidence wouldn't exist. But now we are finding solid evidence that something strange did happen, and that these events actually took place. Then we found people who observed the recovery of the craft from a distance, that saw the task force moving across off roads over country to a secure military facility at Los Alamos. And with these leads, we were able to turn up other witnesses, all of whom had been sworn to secrecy by their superiors at the time they participated in these events. And only a few of them would talk to us, and only on condition that they not be identified because of their vulnerability. What happens in a case of violation of security oaths of this nature, they could lose all pay and allowances due or ever to become due. They could be imprisoned. They could be fined a lot of things that none of them could stand.
I received documents which said that a UFO had landed in the middle of White Sands, New Mexico proving grounds, and that this object was inert, was under surveillance, and would be kept under surveillance until they could determine whether it was hostile or friendly. It later turned out that it was friendly in that the occupants were dead, and when we got aboard there were 5 bodies. The bodies were diminutive in size, in other words 3.5 feet. The largest one was just under 4 feet. 2 of them were obviously the commanding officers because 2 of them wore epaulets on their shoulders. Later turns out that they were all male. When we flew them back to Wright-Patterson, of course, the examination, physical examination, and the autopsy, of course, revealed that they were indeed all male. I think what has happened over the years, the government has lied so much that they have painted themselves into a corner, and it's almost impossible for them to tell the truth today.